The steel drum, also known as pan, is one of the most popular musical instruments to come from the Caribbean region. The history of pan is closely associated with the social struggle in the islands of Trinidad and Tobago in the 19th and 20th centuries. In today's Horizons, the history of the steel drum, producer Vaughn Martin traces the development of this unique musical instrument.
The steel drum, known to many as pan or sweet pan, whichever the word coming from all lips, it means and tells the same story, the history of the social struggle in the islands of Trinidad and Tobago. Pan is the heartbeat of these islands, a nation whose people come from many different races and cultures: African, East Indian, Carib Indian, Spanish and French, and several religions: Hindu, Muslim, Christian. Pan came first from the drumming traditions of both Africa and India. The Indian, the indentured man, carried with him his drum and his sitar. But the African carried only his memories of tribal rituals and traditions, and the skill to craft a drum from next to nothing. The slaves in the fields, cutting cane, picking cocoa, toting banana, were always yearning for the drum. Leaving the fields at sunset, muscles tense, bodies glistening with sweat, seeking refuge from enslavement, they would gather to celebrate their pride and heritage with the drum. But slave owners could not tolerate it. To them, the drum was a current of subversion, anger, insurrection. It seemed to carry a secret message from slave to slave, from plantation to plantation. They outlawed drumming entirely and made it an offense to be severely punished by beating, whipping, and even hanging. When emancipation for slaves in Trinidad and Tobago came in 1838, drumming was still banned. In fact, the ban against drumming was even more rigidly enforced than before. And yet, drumming continued, underground, under cover of night, in secret gatherings and religious ceremonies, high in the hills, outside of the cities and towns, far from the ears of the Port of Spain police. There were occasional moments of open defiance. In 1881, in the famous Canboulay riots, several persons were killed, including Chief Police Officer Captain Baker. The riot started with a police crackdown on drumming, but that incident, and others like it, proved only that drumming could not be silenced. It seemed almost a spiritual necessity for the people who did it. At the same time, all during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, people were improvising with other instruments that were not banned. They were crude pieces of bamboo or reed that were beaten together and tapped on the ground. Hence, tambu bamboo. The music of tambu bamboo bands, which grew out of slavery, grew in acceptance. And by the 1930s, it was widely popular among a majority of folk bands everywhere in Trinidad and Tobago. There was the Heliad Bamboo Band, the Calvary Bamboo Band, and many others. As the Tambu Bamboo bands gained a following, they also began to change and innovate new and more complex forms of musical expression. But still, drums were outlawed, and there remained a yearning amongst musicians that was not satisfied. It was a need for some kind of percussion or something to replace the drum. In 1938, Spree Simon was 11 years old and the proud possessor of a kettle drum, which he certainly played in spite of the band.
At that time, I was a kettle drum player. Now this kettle drum was made up of a soft material about 2 feet in length, and it was played as a snare drum. Pum pum pum, pum pum pum, something like a snare drum.
And now, Spree Simon tells his story of how he discovered pan. You have to remember that this story has as many versions as there are pan players in Trinidad, but this one has to do with Spree's friend, a man who was nicknamed Thicklip.
And I had lent this drum, or loaned this drum to one Thicklip. His right name is Wilson Bartholomew to play. And on coming back to retrieve my drum, the face of the drum was beaten in so badly that it had taken on a concave appearance. Now I just took the drum from him and I went on the side of the road and trying was to get back the face to its normal surface. By prodding on the inside with a stone and a stick, I found by hitting on the different areas of the inside surface, I was able to discover 4 distinct musical notes. And by pounding in and out, I discovered that I was able to get 4 distinct notes, which enabled me to play something of a bugle called pom 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 pom, and therefore I played at that moment tom 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 tom.
This was the birth of pan, a new musical instrument that began to satisfy the long frustrated yearning for the drum. Not only Spree Simon's dented kettle drum, but also many other people's biscuit tins, trash cans, rusty oil drums became, by the end of World War II, what the world knows today as the steel drum, pan. It's a long way from slaves beating their makeshift drums in the hills to a steel drum that can improvise on Chopin. But today the steel drum pan has made it to both classical and big-time pop music. Leslie Jordan is a Trinidadian pan man.
We made it into a complete instrument. This is what the steel drum now sound like at its present stage.
From solitary kettle drum and biscuit tin to the full steel band of today took generations of improvising, suffering, loving and living by many ordinary everyday men and women who made pan their life. One band established in 1947 as the Ohio Boys is still going strong today, and in fact is becoming quite famous as the Amoco Renegades, sponsored by the Amoco Oil Company. The Renegades are no longer beating trash cans and crude oil drums. They play sophisticated chromed instruments. However, as Wilfred Cox, captain of the Renegades, explains, the instruments are still simple oil drums in their origins.
Well, a steel band comprises of oil drums, discarded oil drums where you take and you tune them and you turn them into musical instruments. Now to do this, first to begin you have to sing the drum groove it, burn it, and then tune it to get the notes. Notes arranged just like piano notes, you have F sharp, C, and etc. The pans that make up the steel band, you have the tenor pan, that is the lead pan which carry the melody. Then you have the double tenor, we play the alto to the tenor. Then you have the double second, also is alto. Then you have the double guitars, which is a backup pan, we play the chords. Then you have the 3 cellos, also a backup pan. Then you have the 4 cellos as a filler. Then you have the tenor bass. In classical music, you call that a bassoon. Then you have the low basses and the 9 basses. When people hear about steel band and hear about Trinidad, it come like Trinidad is the land of the steel band and calypso. So when they have an outlook about steel band, the first thing they believe, well, steel band could only play calypso music, where a steel band is equivalent to a symphony orchestra because they have nearly the same type of instruments. You need to see some with strings and some is wind, and then a steel orchestra, everything is steel.
From its earliest days, competition was an integral part of the development of Pan, to the point where bands clashed and fought each other, at times about music and other times about women. In order to stimulate the talent of Pan men, their competitive urge was harnessed into Panorama, a yearly competition amongst steel bands throughout the country. But organized competition required money, and bands began finding sponsors from the private sector. Renegades, for example, became sponsored by the Amoco Oil Company. Hence the name Amoco Renegades. Frank Arlen is Public Relations Coordinator for Amoco Oil Trinidad.
We are sponsors of the band, and in that sense, I look after the band, I look after the budget, and we counsel the band. Some people would like to know, many people wanted to know, why does the band need a sponsor? The steel band is a very expensive unit form of music. And in the same way the big symphonies in America, the Chicago Symphony, other big symphonies need corporate assistance. It's the same with the steel bands back home need such assistance. And we provide that assistance. I think it is important to say that although we assist the band, we are very careful not to take the band away from its members. The band belongs to the members and not to Amoco. And we have developed that kind of relationship with the band.
The Renegades have been extremely successful at competitions. In order to win, they must choose their music carefully. Cox explains what the Paul Anka song My Way means to the band. It's not only a crowd-pleasing song for a Trinidadian audience hungry for the sound of American pop music. Its theme of struggle and independence is deeply meaningful to the Renegades musicians.
So I personally last year choose My Way because I believe, my belief as I thought we would win the Panorama. So we'll play that tune to celebrate. We did it My Way. So, and it's a favorite tune by Americans, sing it Frank Sinatra. So the Americans people will love it.
Andy Duncan has been with Renegades for over 20 years, and he, as much as anyone, knows the ups and downs, the years of barely hanging on that his steel band has been through. Part of it, of course, is the simple fact that Pan, the steel drum, was associated with the people who first played it, the lower class, the dispossessed, even the so-called bad Johns, people your parents would not want you to be hanging around with.
Sometimes rough, sometimes smooth. It is playing music in a steel band is a pleasant experience. It was a pleasant experience for me most of the times, but there were a lot of struggle. There was a lot of struggle when things were not going right. We didn't have a sponsor. We had to struggle all along. People were not prepared to recognize us because our band had the band grew from an era when steel bandsmen were considered to be outcasts, and our band was categorized at this in the lowest form. And we had to struggle to get this recognition which we needed. We knew we could play the music. We knew we could at least attract people to our music. But the recognition was long in coming, in that people were not willing to forget the past of the band.
Mrs. Ray Holman, now in her 60s, is the mother of the famous Ray Holman, who plays tenor pan and is the musical director of Pandemonium Steel Band. Mrs. Holman well remembers how little she liked pan when Ray was growing up and how she struggled to keep her son from playing the stigmatized instrument.
Well, I was very upset in the beginning when I heard that my son was involved in pan. Because in those days, it was very... The men who played pan were not of the best, and there were lots of rows and riots and upheavals, you know. And as long as somebody played a pan, you always thought, well, then the next thing, that they would be in for a lot of trouble, you know. So I really was very upset when I heard that he was playing pan.
Pan continued to develop. Its music blended with carnival, a ritual tradition which occurs every year in Trinidad and Tobago and other islands of the Caribbean. Out of preparation for the festival, a sense of camaraderie amongst band members emerged in the pan yards as the more experienced pan men trained others who joined the band for the season. Andy Duncan of the Amoco Renegades.
For instance, a tenor man. We have 7 tenor men up here. Around carnival season, you find each tenor man is assigned a certain amount of players. If we want to use 40 tenors in the panorama, we assign, say, we divide the 40 by 7, assigning them to the 7 players. And we do this throughout the band. So the job becomes easier. And overall, we have a guy who carries on the practice sessions.
Today, although it is still structured out of the crude oil drum, pan is a sophisticated chromed instrument with a distinct tonal quality. Throughout the past decades, changes and improvisations took place through the contributions of outstanding pan musicians: Ellie Mannett, Theo Stevens, Oscar Pyle, Arthur DeCoto, Hugh Board, Len Bugsy Sharp, and many others. Back to Leslie Jordan, himself a pan tuner.
And this pan I have, it's about 8 inches deep. The notes from the rim, the lower notes from the rim is about 5.5 inches, and various sizes and width. And as we go into the second layer of notes, which is known as the octave, the notes get smaller, which is higher, and we have a third octave, which is also higher. I'll give you a range. I have 36 notes on this pan right now. This is a tenor pan, or what's known as a ping pong, also, or lead pan, or piano pan. Usually tune it by ear to a piano or a strobe, or to a pitch pipe or pitchfork, tuning fork. We use various things to make it sound like it, close to or as accurate as possible to an accurate note on a piano or on a keyboard, violin or guitar, bass guitar, etc.
After more than 40 years of developing, pan is just beginning to acquire some recognition. Its sound continues to amaze many people, astute musicians and composers alike. Although steel bands have toured abroad and Trinidadians take pan with them when they travel, the instrument is beginning to be accepted in the mainstream of the musical world. Roy Boyk was producer of the 1982 Steel Band Music Festival in Port of Spain, Trinidad.
I think we must think worldwide in terms of pan. I think it no longer can be confined to Trinidad and Tobago. And in inviting overseas media here like yourself, and inviting Del Tradici and John Corigliano, we feel this is the most direct way of plugging into mainstream America. Let's face it, this is where it will begin to happen. Whether or not it's classical music, whatever it is, the hegemony of the American media will make it a universal thing.
Now, some sophisticated musicians and critics comment on the growth of the instrument pan. I spoke to them at the 1982 Pan is Beautiful 2 Festival in Port of Spain. First, David Del Tradici, who won the Pulitzer Prize for Music in 1980.
Well, the pan has a wonderfully unique sound. I think it would blend very well. Well, actually, I think it would fit with the orchestra very well by the mere fact it's so different. It would be a fresh color. It would be something we haven't heard with the orchestra. The pan orchestra sounds really very much like an organ to me. It has a very homogeneous, full, rich, surprisingly unpercussive sound. And I think actually it would make a very good accompaniment for other instruments or for a voice.
Another critic at the festival was John Corigliano, an avant-garde composer and music teacher in New York.
I've already thought about pieces that could utilize the pan and how it would be done. It's fascinating to think of combinations, and I think that it could fit into the orchestra and, as David said, add something special to it. I think all of us really have to get to know it better. That's one of the other things. We really don't know. We've only heard it a little bit, and I'd like to sit down with a player and a tape recorder and some paper and start to notate and listen carefully to all the various things it can do. I'm only aware of a few of them.
A third judge was Havelock Nelson.
Because of the very large West Indian population which is living in England now, particularly in London, and even it's spread as far as my country, which is Ireland, you do find that there is a great deal of interest in pan.
Mostly, of course, pan has been used for things like Notting Hill Carnival and things like that. But there are various aspects of it. One of them is the educational aspect. I know a number of schools which have taken up pan where they used to take up recorder, for example. And there's been a swing round because they think that pan is more modern and appeals to the average child, school child.
The story of Pan has been one of struggle against oppression through persistence and intuitive self-expression, as evidenced by the Amoco Renegades when they won the 1982 Panorama Championship with this song, Pan Explosion. How often have we had a chance to witness the birth of a musical instrument? Most of us have been born with other instruments like the violin and the piano already existing. These instruments developed through the children of Europe, but Pan was created by the sons and daughters of Africa, by people who were not musicians. It was created from a feeling in the heart, a yearning for something they were deprived of, and a need for spiritual and artistic expression. That is the story of the steel drum, Pan.
The History of the Steel Drum was written, produced, and narrated by Vaughn Martin. Technical assistance by Greg Hedgepath and Lauren Kelly. Special production by Wendy Blair. Producer for Horizons is Donna Limerick. Assistant producer, David Rector. Executive producer, Frank Tavares.